The blazing Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt as Kim Ji-won slammed his fist against the steering wheel of his pristine 1967 Mustang. The cherry-red paint job that had cost him $40,000 now seemed to mock him. As steam rose from under the hood, his phone showed no signal bars, and the nearest town was miles behind him. Perfect, he muttered, stepping out onto the scorching pavement. His Italian leather shoes weren't made for desert hiking, and his designer suit was already soaked with sweat. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, worth $3 billion, and he couldn't even get his car to start. Ji-won had left Los Angeles that morning for a nostalgic road trip to his childhood home in Texas. The Mustang was his pride and joy, a vintage beauty he'd restored himself during his college days before he became obsessed with building his tech empire. Now it sat lifeless on this forgotten stretch of highway, surrounded by nothing but red rocks and endless desert. He popped the hood and stared at the engine like it might suddenly explain what went wrong. The V8 had been purring like a kitten just an hour ago. Now it wouldn't even turn over. He tried the ignition again, listening to the pathetic clicking sound that meant serious trouble. "Come on, baby," he whispered to the car, as if sweet talk might bring it back to life. He'd talked to this Mustang more than he'd talked to most people lately. Success had made him lonely, and the open road had seemed like the perfect escape. From boardrooms and business deals, the heat was becoming unbearable. Ji-won loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, wondering if he should start walking. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by a small cluster of buildings shimmering in the distance like a mirage. It looked like some kind of settlement, maybe a trading post or gas station. As he debated his options, a small figure emerged from the heat waves, walking along the roadside with the casual confidence of someone who belonged in this harsh landscape. As the figure drew closer, Ji-won realized it was a young girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with dark skin that seemed to absorb the desert sun without complaint. She wore simple clothes, faded jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days, but she moved with purpose. What struck Ji-won most was her complete lack of concern about being alone in the middle of nowhere. Most kids her age would be glued to phones or tablets, but this girl seemed perfectly at home in the wilderness. "Need help, mister?" she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the still air. Ji-won hesitated. His first instinct was to politely decline. What could a child possibly do that he couldn't? But something about her confident stride and direct gaze made him reconsider. "My car broke down," he admitted, gesturing helplessly at the Mustang. The girl nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm Maya," she said, walking straight to the open hood without waiting for an invitation. "And you've got yourself a real beauty here." She peered into the engine compartment with the focused attention of a master mechanic. Her hands moved with surprising precision, checking connections and components that Ji-won hadn't even thought to examine. She tested the battery terminals, examined the spark plug wires, and ran her fingers along parts of the engine with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "When did you last replace the fuel filter?" Maya asked, her head still buried under the hood. Ji-won blinked. "The fuel filter? Honestly, I'm not sure." Maya made a small sound of understanding and continued her examination. She moved like she could see things he couldn't, touching parts of the engine that seemed perfectly fine to him but apparently told her a different story. But what really caught Ji-won's attention wasn't her mechanical skill. It was the ring on her finger. As she worked, he couldn't help but notice the smooth, dark band that encircled her right index finger. It wasn't like any jewelry he'd ever seen. The material looked almost liquid, like polished obsidian, but it seemed to generate its own light. From within, the ring pulsed gently as Maya worked, casting subtle shadows that danced across the engine block. Sometimes the glow intensified when she touched certain components. As if it was responding to her actions or guiding her movements, Jiwon found himself staring at it, mesmerized. The light wasn't harsh or artificial. It was warm and organic, like captured starlight. Every few seconds, patterns would flicker across its surface. Symbols or designs that appeared and vanished too quickly to focus on. "That's an interesting ring," he said, trying to sound casual. Maya glanced up at him, her dark eyes twinkling with something that might have been amusement. "It was my grandmother's," she said simply, then returned to the engine. But Jiwon noticed that she didn't really answer his question, and the way she said grandmother carried weight. Like the word meant something more than family history. Maya's small hands moved deeper into the engine compartment, her fingers dancing across components with the grace of a concert pianist. The ring on her finger pulsed brighter as she worked, casting strange shadows that seemed to reveal hidden details. In the machinery, Jiwon watched in fascination as she disconnected something near the fuel rail with movements so precise they looked almost choreographed. "There's your problem," she said, straightening up and wiping her hands on a cloth that appeared from nowhere. "Your fuel injection system is calibrated wrong. The molecular density of your gasoline is reacting poorly with the ambient atmospheric pressure at this altitude." Jiwon felt his jaw drop. Those weren't words that should come from the mouth of a child. Hell, they weren't words he'd expect from most automotive engineers, he knew. The technical precision of her diagnosis was beyond anything he'd heard outside of advanced engineering conferences. "The what now?" he managed to stammer. Maya tilted her head, studying his confused expression with the patience of someone much older than his. "Your car thinks it's at sea level, but we're about 1,000 feet up here. The air is thinner, so the fuel mixture is all wrong. Plus, your gasoline has additives that create molecular bonds at this temperature that your engine wasn't designed to handle." She spoke about molecular bonds like other kids talked about their favorite video games. Jiwon had a master's degree in engineering, and he was struggling to follow her explanation. "How do you know that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya held up her hand, and the ring caught the desert sunlight, refracting it into colors that shouldn't exist. The dark surface rippled like liquid mercury, and for a moment, Jiwon could swear he saw tiny lights moving inside it like distant stars. "This tells me things," she said simply. "Things my grandmother taught me before she passed. Things her grandmother taught her, going back generations." As she spoke, the ring pulsed more intensely, and Jiwon felt a strange tingling in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Maya reached back into the engine and began making adjustments with tools that seemed to materialize in her hands. Some of them looked normal enough, but others were unlike anything Jiwon had ever seen. One looked like it was made of crystalline metal that bent light round it. Another hummed with a low frequency that made his teeth ache. "The hydrocarbon chains in your fuel are creating resonance patterns that interfere with the electromagnetic field generated by your ignition system." Maya continued conversationally, as if she was discussing the weather. "We need to adjust the quantum phase variance in your spark timing to compensate." Jiwon blinked hard, wondering if the desert heat was making him hallucinate. "Quantum phase variance, that's not. That doesn't exist yet. I mean, theoretically. It might be possible someday. But the technology—" Maya looked up at him with those ancient eyes in a young face. "Doesn't exist where?" "Here on Earth." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jiwon felt something cold crawl up his spine despite the blazing heat. There was something in the way she said here on Earth that suggested she knew about other places where quantum phase variance was as common as changing oil. She reached deeper into the engine, her arm disappearing up to the elbow into spaces that should have been too small to fit. When she withdrew her hand, she was holding what looked like a standard fuel injector, but it was glowing with the same soft light as her ring. "This should work better," she said, installing the component with movements that were too fluid, too perfect. "I've recalibrated it to handle the atmospheric conditions and upgraded the molecular filtration matrix." "Upgraded the what?" Ji-won's voice cracked. Maya smiled, and for a moment she looked like any normal kid who'd just fixed something and was proud of her work. But then the ring pulsed again, and her expression became distant, as if she was listening to voices only she could hear. "Your engine will run smoother now," she said. "The modifications will also improve your fuel efficiency by about 30% and reduce harmful emissions by 97%. Oh. And it'll work fine in any atmospheric condition you might encounter, whether you're at sea level or in the upper atmosphere." "Upper atmosphere," Ji-won repeated weakly. "Why would I need to drive in the upper atmosphere?" My smile became mysterious. "You never know where life might take you." She closed the hood with a gentle thud, and the Mustang seemed to shimmer, for a moment, as if reality had hiccuped. When Ji-won blinked, everything looked normal again. But he could swear the car's paint job was somehow more vibrant, the chrome brighter, the whole vehicle more alive than it had been moments before. "Try starting it now," Ma suggested. Ji-won slid behind the wheel with trembling hands. The key turned, and the engine didn't just start. It purred with a power and smoothness he'd never experienced. The dashboard lit up with readings that made no sense. His fuel gauge showed full despite being nearly empty moments before. The temperature gauge displayed perfect numbers, even more strange. There were new indicators he didn't recognize, showing readings in symbols that looked almost like writing from another world. Maya leaned against the driver's side window, her ring casting rainbow patterns across the dashboard. "Much better," she said with satisfaction. "Now you're ready for whatever comes next." The Mustang's engine roared to life with a sound that was deeper, richer, and somehow more alive than before. Ji-won felt the vibrations through the steering wheel, but they weren't just mechanical vibrations anymore. There was something else, like the car was humming with energy that came from somewhere far beyond Earth. Maya hopped up onto the car's bumper, her legs swinging casually as if she hadn't just performed mechanical miracles. The ring on her finger pulsed brighter now, casting dancing lights across the desert landscape. In those lights, Ji-won could swear he saw shapes moving, ships sailing through star-filled void, cities floating in space. Creatures that walked on two legs but weren't quite human. "My grandmother wasn't from here," Maya said, her voice taking on a distant quality as she stared up at the afternoon sky. "Neither were her grandparents. We're human, but we've been elsewhere." Ji-won turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, his legs feeling unsteady. "What do you mean, elsewhere?" Maya's eyes seemed to focus on something millions of miles away, long ago. Some humans were taken to the stars, not stolen. Exactly. More like invited. The galaxy is a big place, full of civilizations that needed help with problems they couldn't solve alone. As she spoke, the ring projected tiny holographic images into the air above her palm. Ji-won saw what looked like massive ships descending from the sky, but not in a threatening way. They landed gently in fields and deserts, their hulls gleaming like polished mirrors. Humans walked toward these ships willingly, carrying tools and books, their faces filled with curiosity rather than fear. "Why humans?" Ji-won asked, mesmerized by the tiny light show. "Because we're good at fixing things." Maya said with a grin that was both childlike and ancient. Other species in the galaxy are amazing at lots of stuff. The Kepler beings can manipulate gravity like we manipulate clay. The crystal folk from the Vega system can store information in living rock for millions of years. But when something breaks, when systems fail, when the impossible needs to become possible, she gestured to his perfectly running Mustang. They call for humans. The holographic display shifted, showing human engineers working alongside beings that looked like living geometry, others that seemed to be made of pure light, and creatures that defied description. But in every scene, the humans were the ones, with their hands deep in machinery, their faces lit up with the joy of solving problems. They learned things, built things, became something more. Maya continued, "This ring holds all their knowledge, centuries of human innovation combined with technologies from across the galaxy." She held up her hand, and the ring's surface rippled. Like water, inside its depths, G1 could see what looked like entire libraries of information flowing like rivers of light, technical specifications for engines that could cross galaxies in days, blueprints for cities that existed in the spaces between dimensions, medical knowledge that could heal injuries by rewriting the very code of life. Your great-great-great-grandmother might have been one of the first to go, Maya said, watching his face carefully. The early pioneers who left Earth when steam engines were the height of technology. By now, their descendants are building warp drives and teaching alien civilizations how to make their impossible dreams real. Ji-won's hands trembled as he processed her words. "You're saying your family is from space." Maya's expression became gentle, understanding, from Earth originally. "But yes, we've been among the stars for generations, working with others, learning, growing. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old home world, about blue skies and rain and oceans. She said the humans who stayed behind were just as important as those who left, because someone had to keep the home fires burning." The ring pulsed, and suddenly the air around them filled with sounds, not quite music, but harmonies that seemed to come from a dozen different worlds. There were deep, thrumming notes that felt like the heartbeat of gas giants, crystalline chimes that sounded like singing mountains, and underneath it all, the familiar rhythm of human voices speaking in languages that had evolved among the stars, and now some of us have come home. Maya said, her voice mixing with the cosmic symphony, "Not to stay forever, but to check on our cousins, to see how Earth has grown, to share what we've learned and maybe learn something new." She slid down from the bumper and walked to the front of the Mustang, placing her palm on the hood. The car's engine responded with a gentle purr, and the dashboard inside lit up with readings that showed fuel efficiency numbers that shouldn't be possible. "The beings we work with wanted to make contact officially," Maya continued, "but they're worried about scaring people. Humans can be suspicious of outsiders, even when those outsiders are their own family. So they sent some of us ahead, humans who still look human, but who carry the knowledge of the stars." She turned to face Ji-won directly, and in her young eyes, he saw the accumulated wisdom of centuries. "We're here to find the right people. The ones who are ready to know that humanity's greatest adventure didn't end when we learned to fly. It began when we learned to dream of flying between the stars." The desert wind picked up, carrying scents that reminded Ji-won of rain on alien worlds he'd never seen, and for the first time in his life, he understood that the universe was far more amazing than he'd ever dared to imagine. Maya stood and dusted off her hands with the casual confidence of someone who had just completed a routine task rather than perform mechanical miracles. The desert wind caught her hair, and for a moment, the ring on her finger blazed so brightly that it cast shadows across the sand like a miniature sun. "Your breakdown wasn't an accident, Ji-won," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made the air around them feel electric. We've been watching Earth, waiting for the right time to make contact. G1 felt his world tilt sideways. Watching. For how long? Maya gestured to his perfectly running Mustang, which now hummed with an energy that seemed to make the very air shimmer. Long enough to learn that humans here have developed in fascinating ways. You've built cities that touch the sky, created networks that connect minds across continents, and started reaching for the stars again. But we needed to know if you still had the thing that made our ancestors special. As she spoke, the ring projected new images into the air between them. This time, G1 saw scenes of observation, sleek ships that moved like shadows through Earth's atmosphere, recording and analyzing without being detected. He watched invisible probes studying human behavior in cities, schools, laboratories, and workshops. The Watchers were particularly interested in moments when humans helped strangers, solved problems together, or showed kindness to those who seemed different. What thing? G1 asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. The willingness to accept help from unexpected places, Maya said, pointing to where he'd first met her on the empty highway. The curiosity to ask questions instead of just dismissing the impossible, the courage to trust someone who doesn't look like they belong in your world. The projected images shifted to show other humans being tested across the globe. A businessman in Tokyo helping a strange old woman fix her unusual device. A farmer in Brazil listening carefully when a lost child spoke about advanced irrigation techniques. A teacher in Norway taking notes when a quiet student explained concepts that hadn't been invented yet. You tested me, G1 realized, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya nodded, her expression becoming more serious, and you passed. You didn't drive away when a child offered to help with your expensive car. You didn't dismiss me when I started talking about molecular density and quantum phases. You listened. You asked questions. You stayed curious even when everything I said should have been impossible. She walked closer to him. G1 noticed that her footsteps left no marks in the sand, as if she weighed nothing at all. Most people would have thanked me politely and driven away, convinced they'd imagined the whole thing, or they would have become suspicious and demanded to know who I really was, or they would have gotten scared and called the authorities. The ring flashed again, showing him alternate timelines where different versions of himself had failed the test. In one, he drove away the moment Maya approached. In another, he called the police when she started talking about impossible technologies. In a third, he tried to grab the ring from her finger, convinced it was some kind of advanced gadget he could steal and reverse engineer. But you didn't do any of those things, Maya continued. You did what the best humans have always done throughout the galaxy. You stayed open. You stayed curious. You treated a stranger with respect and kindness, even when that stranger challenged everything you thought you knew about the world. Above them, the sky began to shimmer. At first, G1 thought it was heat waves, but then he realized the distortion was too regular, too purposeful. Shapes were becoming visible, massive forms that had been hidden just beyond the edge of perception. We've been testing humans for decades, Maya explained, watching his face as he stared up at the sky. Not just individuals, but entire communities, nations, species. We needed to know if Earth was ready for the next step. The ships became clear now, not the sleek, threatening vessels of science fiction movies, but elegant constructions that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. Their hulls were covered in patterns that reminded G1 of circuit boards crossed with living coral. Lights pulsed along their surfaces in rhythms that felt familiar, like heartbeats or breathing. The beings we work with have seen too many civilizations destroy themselves when they learned they weren't alone, Maya said. Fear, jealousy, the need to be the most important species in the universe. These things can tear a world apart. But they've also seen civilizations flourish when they're ready to join the larger community. One of the ships descended closer, and Ji-won could see movement inside its transparent sections. There were humans there, people who looked like him, but who moved with the confidence of those who had walked between stars. They worked alongside beings of pure energy, creatures that looked like living crystals, and entities that shifted between different forms as he watched. That's what makes humans special throughout the galaxy, Maya said, her voice filled with pride. We're not the strongest species, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But we're the ones who build bridges. We're the ones who look at something completely alien and ask, how can we help? Instead of how can we use this, the ring on her finger pulsed one more time. And suddenly Ji-won could hear voices. Human voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize, but somehow understood. They were calling to Earth, welcoming it back into the family of worlds, ready to share the wonders they had discovered among the stars. So what happens now? Ji-won asked, his voice full of wonder rather than fear. Ma smiled, and in that smile, he saw the future of humanity stretching out across the cosmos like a constellation of possibility. Smaya walked round the Mustang one final time, her hand trailing along the cherry-red paint that now seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The ring on her finger had grown brighter throughout their conversation, and now it cast patterns across the car's surface that looked like star maps written in languages older than human civilization. I've made some changes to your car, she said, patting the hood affectionately. More than just fixing the engine. It can now communicate with our people among the stars. As if responding to her words, the Mustang's radio crackled to life without Ji-won touching anything. Static filled the air, but underneath it, he could hear something that made his heart race. Voices, human voices speaking in tones of excitement and wonder. You can talk to humans who've built cities on distant worlds. Maya continued, adjusting something invisible under the hood. People who've helped alien civilizations solve problems they couldn't handle alone. Engineers who've learned to build with living metal that grows into whatever shape you need. Doctors who've discovered how to heal injuries by singing to damaged cells. Artists who paint with pure light on canvases made of crystallized time. The radio volume increased. And suddenly Ji-won could make out individual conversations. A woman speaking rapid Korean was describing something about gravity farms that grew food in zero atmosphere. A man with a British accent was laughing about teaching sick-armed beings from the Centauri system how to play chess. Children's voices chattered excitedly about schools where lessons were taught by floating creatures that looked like living rainbows. This is impossible, Ji-won whispered, but he was smiling as he said it. Maya climbed onto the car's hood and sat cross-legged, looking like any normal kid except for the way space itself seemed to bend slightly round her. The modifications I made aren't just to your engine. Your entire car is now a communication hub. The steering wheel can receive messages from 17 different star systems. The mirrors can show you real-time images of human colonies on worlds. With purple skies and silver seas, the radio doesn't just pick up Earth stations anymore. She gestured to the dashboard. And Ji-won saw that new controls had appeared, buttons and dials that definitely hadn't been there. An hour ago, some were labeled in English, others in symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than his brain could process. But that's not the most important change, Maya said, her expression becoming serious. Your car can now travel between worlds. Ji-won's knees went weak. Travel between worlds, you mean like space travel? Not exactly like the rocket's Earth builds, Maya explained patiently. More like folding space that two points touch each other. Your Mustang can now step between realities. Slip through gaps in the universe that most people never notice. The galaxy is full of highways that connect every inhabited world. And now you have the keys. Above them, the hidden ships were becoming more visible as the afternoon sun shifted position. Ji-won could see them clearly now. Dozens of vessels, of impossible beauty, each one unique, as if they'd been crafted by artists rather than engineers. Some looked like giant flowers made of metal and light. Others resembled schools of fish swimming through the air in perfect formation. One massive ship appeared to be constructed entirely from what looked like living wood, its branches reaching out to embrace the smaller craft round it. "The choice is yours," Maya said, looking directly into Ji-won's eyes with an intensity that made him feel like she could see straight through to his soul. "You can be Earth's first ambassador to its own children. Help us reconnect our scattered family. Show the humans among the stars that their home world is ready to rejoin the galactic community." She slid down from the hood and stood beside the driver's door. "Or you can choose to forget this ever happened. I can remove all the modifications. Make your car exactly what it was before. You can drive home to your normal life, and none of this will seem like anything more than a strange dream brought on by too much desert heat." Ji-won felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him like the gravity of entire worlds. Through the car's radio, voices continued to call out. Humans who had been born under alien suns but still remembered Earth in their dreams. Scientists who had unlocked the secrets of traveling faster than light. Children who played games with beings made of pure mathematics. "What would happen to Earth?" he asked. "If I say yes, what changes?" Maya's smile was radiant. "Everything and nothing. The world keeps turning. People keep living their lives, but slowly, carefully. We begin to share what we've learned. New technologies that can heal the environment, energy sources that never run out. Medicine that can cure diseases by teaching the body how to fix itself, and eventually, when Earth is ready, the chance for anyone who wants it to walk among the stars." The radio voices grew louder, more insistent. They were calling his name now, somehow knowing who he was and what choice he faced. Ji-won could hear his own language mixed with dozens of others. All human, all family he'd never known existed. "What do you say?" Maya asked, her ring glowing so brightly it cast rainbow shadows across the desert sand, ready to discover what humanity has become among the stars. Ji-won looked at his Mustang, the car that had been his escape from loneliness, now transformed into a bridge between worlds. He thought about his empty mansion, his successful but solitary life, and the vast universe full of family he'd never imagined. He smiled and started the engine. The familiar rumble now carried an otherworldly harmony that seemed to resonate with music from 1,000 different worlds. The steering wheel felt warm under his hands, alive with possibilities. "Let's go meet the family," he said. Maya laughed with pure joy and hopped into the passenger seat. As they pulled away from the desert highway, the Mustang's tires left the ground, and they soared upward toward the waiting ships and the infinite wonders of home. The end.